as I see it now. Okay, so I shared with you guys yesterday the goals I set for my book, The Corn Grows Right. And I said that my goal to finish was next week, March 6th. And my goal to work on as a reader, I actually had two goals. I'm going to work on Spanish vocabulary. The English words in this book are really easy for me. I know all of them. But there's some Spanish words in here, and I know very little Spanish. So I thought this would be an opportunity for me to really notice the Spanish words and learn some Spanish. Also, I'm thinking about the genre of the book. If you remember, I shared with you that I think it's realistic fiction. So far, it seems like something that could really happen. But there's also sort of this element of Mayan folklore in there. So I'm sort of noticing these two genres coming together. In the beginning of the book, it told an old Mayan folk tale. And so I'm watching as I read if I notice any more folklore in there as well. Okay? So, I am currently right here on chapter 2, the milpa. And I think this is a Spanish word because I don't recognize it, so I'm going to read on and find out. Tigre and father and dog passed quickly through the village and turned from the road into the bush. Here the animals lived, deer and jaguar and wild pig, snakes and insects. Here were the ruins of the ancient stone-carved temples, now only tree-covered mounds. Well, I'm noticing these ancient stone-carved temples because I'm wondering if those are maybe like old Mayan temples. And here in the bush, men made their cornfields, cutting down forest and clearing new land every few years. Okay, so he and his father are out, and they're in a place where men have grown corn in the cornfields. The bush belonged to the gods, not to man. Men only borrowed it for a little because of their hunger, always asking the gods for permission. And after a few years, they returned the land and made new clearings somewhere else. For 2,000 years, Tigre's people had used the land and returned it. So I'm noticing this as well because this might be part of that sort of Mayan culture and tradition. And it reminds me of how, like, things that I've read about the North American Indians, that they don't believe the land belongs to them, that they're only borrowing it and using it. So this might be part of that culture and that folklore that I was thinking that I might see in this book. And always borrowing, never possessing or destroying, they had passed on to their children as rich as it had been passed on to them. They walked single file along the narrow trail, father first, and then Tigre, then dog. Stones and roots of trees choked the pathway. Branches and thorns tore their clothing and scratched their cheeks. Father had cut the trail when he chose the land for his milpa. So there's that word milpa. And Tony, I put your stuff in the basket. So if you need it, that's where it's at. It's over here, isn't it? In this basket over here. Okay. So here's that word milpa again. So let me look. Father had cut the trail when he chose the land for his milpa. So milpa must be some kind of a crop. Because what else would you choose land for? Because it sounds like they're out in the country. It had not been used for some time, and already the bush was crowding back over the narrow opening as it grew back over every open space. Little used trails, abandoned milpas. Well, I thought milpas was a crop, but how could you, like, abandoned crops? Maybe that could be, but it doesn't, I'm not sure if that makes sense. The ancient cities, until no one knew that a clearing had ever been there. So maybe a milpa is a clearing? Let me reread that sentence. It had not been used for some time, so he's talking about the milpa, and already the bush was crowding back over the opening. So the bush is growing over the opening of the milpa, so maybe the milpa is the land. And as it grew back over every open space, little used trails, abandoned milpas, the ancient cities, until no one knew that a clearing had ever been there. So I don't know if it's the land you grow crops on or if it's the crop itself. The 2 seasons, months of sun alternating with months of rain, made for this fast-growing forest. I'm going to go ahead and look that word up in my Spanish-English dictionary and see what I find out. Milpa. Milpa. Oh, cornfield. So it's both. It's the land and, well, it's the land that you would use to grow corn on. So it is the land. What I'm going to do, since I'm really working on these goals as a reader, I'm going to make a place in my room grows right. I just put a little sticky there so I could turn to that place. So my goal is to work on Spanish vocabulary. And I'm also really thinking about the genre. So today, my word was milpa, and I've learned that it's cornfield. And as far as the genre goes, I'm going to write down the 2 things that I'm kind of thinking so I can track those. Realistic fiction, and then I'm also looking for Mayan folklore in here. And today I did see some things that made me think about that folklore. On page 21 here, where it talked about the gods giving them permission in the ancient temples. So, Mayan gods. So as I'm kind of putting together some information, I can go back and look at my notes as I think about that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what did you see me doing as a reader today as I was reading and thinking about my goals? DNA, what did you notice?
You were going back to the book to see like which kind of new words you learned.
Okay, so I went back to the book to think about my new word. Okay, Austin.
You're trying to figure out what milpa means?
Okay, I tried to figure out what the word meant, didn't I?
You reread it, a sentence, and we didn't understand what it meant.
Okay, so I did reread that sentence that was confusing for me. And over here, what hand did I see? Okay. Viviana?
You read it in a dictionary?
Okay, I looked it up in the dictionary to make sure. Priscilla, what'd you notice?
I noticed that you were using context clues and text when you didn't know what the word meant.
Yeah, use those context clues first. Rogelio?
You did notes.
I made some notes, didn't I? Why do you think I did that?
So like, after you're done with your book, you can start thinking about those stuff, and like if you're stuck, you can go back and kind of get an idea of what's happening.
Okay. And Jesus?
We collected some evidence from the book.
Collected evidence from the book. So what did I do today, ladies and gentlemen, that you can do as you're reading and thinking about your goals? What can you do that you saw me do today? DNA?
We could try to, like the way we notes when we looked it up in the dictionary.
Okay, so if you can't figure out a word, you could look it up in a dictionary, okay? What else did you see me do that you might try as you're thinking about your goals and doing your reading? Brianna, what might you try?
Like putting it like that, and like making a line so you can see like the words down that you don't know.
So you might keep track of your new words that you're learning in your notebook, okay? Anything else you guys might try? How about over here? What might you try that I did today? Miguel?
The dictionary.
You might use a dictionary when you don't know a word? All right, we're going to move into independent reading time, and this is your objective. You're going to think about your goal as you're reading. Okay, some of you said that you want to make a place where you're going to keep track of some of your vocabulary or some of the things that you're noticing about your text. I'm going to be calling some people back to the table. You still need to share their goals with me. We need to set goals. Okay, so reading time is what kind of time?
Silent time.
Silent, okay. So let's get really focused on that reading. Again, I'm in. What's your goal date to finish that book? March 16th? Okay, and what are you thinking that you'll work on as a reader? Okay, gentlemen. Shh. This is not an emergency, I need you to wait. Jose's table, do what you need to do to get silent.
We did a pencil too?
Have you started reading this book yet? Have you found figurative language? You have found some figurative language. So what are you going to do to find that figurative language? So you can look at this as a writer, how you'll use it. Okay. Thank you, here. Okay. Does he have a copy? No?
I'll read it like, he reads that page, I'll read this page.
You may do that silently today, like within a whisper, okay? All right, guys, I am in the middle of working with some students, so if it's not an emergency, I need you to wait, okay? All right, DNA, what book are you reading? Okay, so have you set goals for each one?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the first one.
First one, I'm gonna put this picture of
Pictures of bottle sports? Okay. And what day do you set for a goal to finish that? March 15th. And what are you thinking that you'll work on as a reader in this book? Oh, that's right. So did you write a few pages? So as you look at the bulletin board and think about that book, what might be a good thing to work on? Is this fiction or nonfiction? It's fiction. So that'll help you make a decision. So take a look at the board and think about what might be a good thing to work on in a fiction book, okay? All right, Jesus, you're reading Blueprint, right? No, stay. To share with me. Oh, thank you. That's really cool. And what's your goal date to finish?
Since I already finished my little book, I shortened it a little bit. And then for what?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do some.
For this book, 317? Okay. And your goal to work on as a reader?
Pages and it's based on true life.
Okay, so you're kind of questioning that, like, why did the writer write this? What do they want me to get out of it? Okay. As you're reading this and thinking about author's purpose, how do you kind of keep track of your thinking and what you're learning and noticing? Books, thank you. How are you going to keep track of that? So you're going to kind of think about this chapter, what was the author saying, what was the purpose? Okay, nice. Are you going to keep track of this anywhere? Yeah. You're going to keep a page in there for that? Thank you. All right, what are you thinking? Tell me about that. Okay, let me ask you a question. Are you sure that you will see bias in this book? Do you know, is there anything that makes you think that you're going to see bias in this book? So tell me what you know about mice. When the author's words show feelings for or against something. So do you have anything that makes you think the author is going to be for or against something? What do you think the author might be for or against? So you said this is fiction, right? So it's made up?
Wait.
Is fiction true or is it made up? False. It's a made up story, it's not true? Okay. So if this is fiction, how can we know if the author's just making it up or if they really believe that they're for or against something? Okay, what makes you think that? So you see a real picture on the front? How can we figure out if this is fiction or non-fiction? Maybe that's what you should work on. Maybe genre should be your goal. What do you think? Sounds like that's your question right now. Would you like to do genre? And as you read, see, is this fiction or is this non-fiction? And then when you figure that out, we can maybe talk some more and see if that's something you want to talk about later. Okay, I'm going to put you down for genre. So you want to spell it? So as you're reading, you're going to be thinking about, what genre is this, right? And do you want to collect your thinking anywhere? How are you going to help yourself do this? So you're thinking about the genre after each chapter, you want to kind of write notes about that?
Right now it's fiction because we're special moment of days with them in pictures she never forgot.
Okay, so this could be one, that's one thing that you're thinking, maybe it's nonfiction? Okay, so that's your thinking currently, and then you're going to gather some more evidence that it can be. Okay, good point. Thank you. Okay, Ricardo, you are reading. Find your name here. Yes, your group name. You're reading the Freedom Writing Style. What's your goal to finish that, Ricardo?
To work on?
Date to finish. March 26th. Okay, are you reading that home and school or just at school? And your goal to work on, sometimes. Goal to work on as a reader? So it has hard vocabulary in it. What are you doing when you run across those hard words? So reading on is helping you kind of figure out some of the words. Have you ever run across any words that you couldn't figure out? Or are you figuring out most of them in the text? Some of them. So what do you do then? You go on, okay. So you're going to kind of keep track of the new vocabulary that you're learning, right? And how are you going to keep track of that? You want to keep notes too on your vocabulary that you're learning? Is there anything else that you could do to help yourself remember those new words so that you can notice them in your reading and use them in your writing? Or do you even want to use those new words in your writing? Maybe some of them you might try in your writing as well? Okay, sounds like you have a plan. Thank you, sir. Okay. Please. Okay, let's start with Step from Heaven. All right.
This book has a lot of Korean in it, so I'm going to try and learn most of Korean. And when they're trying to speak English, they can't pronounce it right, so I'm going to try to.
So you're seeing Korean vocabulary. How interesting. So you're going to notice the Korean vocab. And the other thing was?
And so they're learning to speak English, and they can't get their words together. So it's hard to understand what they're saying.
Oh, can you show me what that looks like?
Like, when she says goldfish, she says booty fish.
Oh, interesting.
Lunch, she says lunch.
So when you, as a reader, when you come across that, what happens for you?
It kind of gets me mixed up in my mind.
You kind of go back and think about it to figure it out. So have you been able to figure these out?
Yeah, it was just one that kind of got me confused.
Interesting. So, I'm trying to think what we could call that. I'm looking at the characteristics that we've got on the bulletin board. So you're noticing so the writer is actually showing you how they're saying it. And so, could we call this maybe like the author's craft? Like this is how the author is crafting the text to show you that the girl is learning English. That's the one thing I don't have on the board yet. So we could say that you're going to notice how the writer uses, how the writer crafts the text to give you that information about the character. Let's try that. We'll call it author's craft. You want to write that down in your notebook?
Yeah.
Get your pencil. Okay. And let's take a look at this. Is your other book? Alright, so someone to love me. And what's your goal date on this? And working on as a reader. Okay, so you think the main character is Cindy, but you're mostly getting the mother's point of view. Okay, so point of view. As you notice things that make you think about point of view, what are you going to do with that? What she says now. They called you. Are you going to make some notes anywhere? Or stickies? Or what will you do to kind of mark your thinking? Because you can be sure that I'll be asking you, so what are you learning about the point of view in that book? And then you'll have some places that you can go to talk to me about that, okay? All right, thank you, dear. All right, so Diana, so you're reading the Pictures of Paul Stories as well. And what is your goal date to finish?
March 14th.
March 15th. And what do you want to work on as a reader?
And figurative language.
Okay, B and I had this discussion. Tell me what you know about bias. Tug his feelings with words. with the words they choose, you can tell how they feel. So is this fiction or nonfiction? Fiction. So it's a made-up story?
Looks like it could happen.
What makes you say that?
Well, I think it is nonfiction. Because Hollywood is a real person, isn't it?
Hollis Woods? Does that sound like something you know about?
No.
Okay. So what are you thinking, fiction or nonfiction?
Well, like right now,
Not sure right now. So, DNA decided that she's reading this book as well, with you in book club, right? And she thought, before she attacked bias, let me see if this is fiction or nonfiction. So genre, yeah. We had a discussion that if it's fiction, if it's a made-up story, are we gonna really see bias in that? Are we gonna really know how the author feels, or are they making it up? So, what do you think? Genre?
yeah.
Have you seen some figurative language in there?
No, not right now.
Not right now, so you're keeping your eye out to see if you see any? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna put you down for genre and figurative language. And when you figured out the genre, then let's talk more about bias. Okay? So look for those clues. Okay? So probably next week I'll ask you to respond and you'll be able to talk to me about what you've noticed. All right, thank you, dear. Okay, and Joel?
I've already started reading the book now.
Okay, get the book.
I haven't read it yet.
Where is it?
So I'm going to one of my
So what are you reading?
short stories.
Is that a book that you're also reading? Okay, so let's get our goal down for that. Do you have it down in here?
No, not yet.
Okay. So you're reading 2 books right now, scary stories plus your book at home. So if you'll bring it in tomorrow, then we can set that goal as well. So scary stories.
Only one page.
You only need 1 page? Why don't you go up and grab my reader's notebook, the orange one off the cart, so that you can look at that list of what we wrote down, okay? And I'll talk to Nathan for a minute. So Nathan, what are you reading? Oh, you're in that book club as well? Okay, what's your goal date to finish? March 10th? And your goal to work on as a reader? So your goal is to work on figuring out unfamiliar words in the text, okay? Tell me more about what you're going to do in that. What are you going to do when you come across a word you don't know in the book? You're going to reread, okay, the sentence, and if you don't figure it out, then what are you going to do? If rereading that sentence didn't work. And you make it a dictionary? Okay. Are you going to keep track of the new words you're writing somewhere? Yeah, where? In your reader's notebook? Okay. Do you have any other strategies besides rereading the sentence when you don't know a word in a text? No? Ever tried reading back more than one sentence or reading on to the next sentence? Have you ever tried that? No? That might be something to try as well. Sometimes I've found in the past that sometimes there's clues in the sentence before it, or maybe even a sentence or two after it. Sometimes you've even found a clue to a word like a couple paragraphs down. So that might be something that you can also think about as well. So you're going to make a vocabulary page in there for your book of your new words. Okay, that sounds like a good goal. Thank you, Nathan. Okay, Joel, so,
It's fiction.
goal. It's fiction?
Because it's well, some, this is that.
Right
It could
here.
happen.
Date, title, author, number of pages, goal to finish, so that'd be the date that you finish
We'll finish like by tomorrow.
by tomorrow on the scary stories.
Because I only need like one chapter.
Okay, so what are you looking on as a reader in that book?
How like it's like it's because there's some Italian words that I don't forget, like bonjour, and like other words that I can't even pronounce.
So how do you know they're Italian?
Because they look like Italian.
Oh, the people look Italian in the pictures?
Some people look at telling me that.
Is that the Scary Stories book?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. Do you have it here? Can I see it?
That one.
That's the one you read at home. So what's the one you said you're reading here?
Right now I'm reading on here. But I'm starting another book out.
Okay. So you're starting another book at home, but you need a book to read here. Okay, so I want you to go to our library and find a book that you're going to read in class every day. And then Maria's going to go over that. Okay? So go ahead and leave your notebook here and go find a book that you'd like to read. Would you do me a favor and just read this one? Although she does smell a bit enhanced her side. So how did you figure out that?
I sounded it.
You sounded it out? Did that work first when you sounded it out? Did that work? You said, I don't know what that is, remember that? And then I said, songwriting isn't part of it. And then what happened? And you figured out the chords. Okay. So in this case, noticing some parts of the new and then you figure it out. Sometimes that works, right? Okay. So tell me about Libby.
Libby is her friend. Her name is Georgia.
So the main character is Georgia, and Libby is her friend.
Her sister.
Libby is her sister or her friend?
Sister.
Georgia's little sister. Okay, so what's going on with Libby and Georgia?
Georgia, she's in the 6th grade. She's just like dating around. And boys will talk to her, and she's like so ugly and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
So she's like having problems.
she's feeling bad about herself. What is this 10 p.m. midnight?
It's like a diary.
Oh, so this is Georgia's diary. I'm really, so she's kind of wanting to bring out all of her thoughts in there. Interesting. So what questions do you have as a reader right now?
I wonder why she's so ugly and stuff.
Why does she think that?
Why does she think like she's a bad person and stuff like that?
And she thinks she's a bad person.
Because she thinks that she can't like do anything and she has a really bad family, but she doesn't. And she's just like down for herself.
So she's not like low self-esteem, just like down on herself. So you're wondering why. So as you read on, you look
I'm maybe looking for like ways to tell me why does she feel bad about herself.
So you're kind of wondering now, like, so what's going on about
Annette? Place Mark? Jose? Okay, ready? All right, guys, we've been talking about commas. And we've identified 3 different comma rules that we saw in different texts, right? So let's just take a look at those really quickly. We've talked about the fact that we've seen writers join 2 sentences together with a comma and conjunction, okay? And so we thought writers make these compound sentences, they do it sometimes, right? They don't do it all the time. And we noticed that sometimes they do it to show examples, and sometimes to give information, sometimes to show reader that the information goes together, and it gives variety for the reader. So these are the things we noticed about why writers do that, okay? Then we noticed that writers sometimes put a comma after an introductory phrase. Remember we talked about how a phrase is just a little group of words. It does not have a subject and a verb in it. Just a little group of words like, in the page below, comma, right? Or for example, comma. So we saw those things. And we said that writers put commas after introductory phrases to make the reader pause, to make the reader think about the words, to make you think about when, where, who, or what's going on. And then we noticed that sometimes there's a comma after a transition that starts the sentence, like for example. Like in Maria's letter on the other wall. We saw her do that in that transition, okay? And then a third rule that we've identified is that writers use commas to separate 3 or more items in a list within a sentence. And so here's what we noticed about that. They do that to separate items in a list. It could be a list of words, like we saw yesterday, summer, comma, spring, comma, fall, all right? Or it could be phrases, like I want decorations in my kitchen, comma, eyes over here please, in my living room, comma, and in my garage, okay? Or it could be clauses, okay, so we've talked about that. And we noticed that lists are things that go together. We also noticed that the commas make the readers pause so that he or she can tell that the items in the list are separate things. So it helps our reader not to be confused, all right? So I thought to myself, am I using all 3 of these rules in my own writing? So I did a little comma research. Let me show you what that looks like. I went investigating and I started with my pet story that I've been working on. Okay, so let me show you what I found. I went to my pet story, and while I found that I used a lot of commas for different reasons, for some other rules that we haven't talked about yet, in my pet story, I did find that I used that number 2 rule, put a comma after an introductory phrase. I used that quite a bit in my pet story. So let me show you what I found. Like here, I kind of underlined it. Then one fateful day, comma, I noticed as I walked by that Manson was slithering towards Mousy number 3. Okay, so the reason I did that is I really wanted the reader to notice that part, to stop and think about that for a second. Then one fateful day. I wanted the reader to think, oh, what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen to the poor mouse? So I used the comma after an introductory phrase. Also here, look here. In horror, comma, I watched. And so I wanted the reader to just stop a second and notice that how am I watching? I'm horrified. I'm scared of what I'm going to see, right? Is the snake going to eat the mouse? Right? So as I looked through this piece, I saw that I used that second rule that we've identified. So here's kind of a way to keep track of that. So that's on our chart, rule number 2. Ladies, I'm going to ask you to do this as well, so I'd like your attention up here. We're all going to do some comma research as writers today. So for rule 2, which is commas after introductory phrases, I use this in my pet story. And so to keep track of, so I could talk about this later, I underlined the 2 places I saw it, and I labeled one A and one B. So that if I want to look back and talk about this, I've got that to help me, okay? So I'm going to just put CA and B. Those are my examples of that. But you know what? I did not find examples of joining 2 sentences to make a compound in my story, and I did not find examples of using commas in a list to separate things in that story. So I kind of said, well, let me look at some other writing that I have. And I pulled out my Sophie Kitty story, remember this one? And here's what I saw in here. Up on top, I had a list. When we got home, there were the usual Sunday family activities. Guitar picking, comma, piano picking, playing, comma, tickle attacks, comma, book reading, comma, and naps. And so I can see that my reader can clearly see that these are different things that we did on Sunday afternoons, okay? So I did use rule 3, which is, I'll just call it what, commas in a list?
Yeah.
And that was, I'm just going to say the Sophie story, right? Sophie. And so I labeled that here. I just underlined it, labeled it A, so I could talk about that. CA. All right. I also did find, in my second paragraph, an example of the first rule that we found about joining 2 sentences. And here's what I saw. Her eyes would glow big and yellow with black slits in the sunlight, comma, and her long black silky hair would puff out at the sight of other creatures that she could glimpse through the rails. So what I realized is the reason that I joined those 2 sentences together is because both of those sentences are describing what the cat looked like. So I joined those together. So I did actually use rule 1, which was commas to join sentences. And that's again in my Sophie story. And I labeled that one B so I could find that. Okay, so just going through and identifying, am I using these rules in my writing?
Yeah.
That's information for me, okay? Because these things can help my reader. So next, I'm going to think about what I've learned, okay? So as a writer, I learned that I do use all 3 comma rules that we've talked about. But I don't use them in every piece. It seems like I just use them when I need to. So it's really about making meaning. Yeah. But I don't always use them in every, use all of them in every piece of writing. I think that's because how do I want to say that? That I use them to make meaning when it's appropriate. Like I don't just try to stick all the comma rules in. If it doesn't make sense, I don't use it. So I think that's because I only use them when I need them. Well, basically, like if I separate the items in a list or that, it's really about my reader. So when I need them to help my reader. Okay? So that's what I learned from my comma research today. Ladies and gentlemen, what did you notice me doing as a writer? Rogelio, what'd you notice?
You made a research about what rules you did in some of your stories, and you found on the number 2 you found 2 examples, and your other story you found 3
Okay. How does that help me as a writer, do you think, thinking about that?
to try to figure out if you did a good job writing, so it would help the reader.
Okay. So am I thinking about my reader and using commas to help my reader? Okay. What else did you notice? Priscilla, what'd you notice?
Like you putting letters A and B so that you can show examples of what you've done in your own writing and using comments.
So I labeled it so that I could talk about that since we've been having discussion about punctuation lately. Okay. Antonia, what did you see me doing as a writer today? Okay, I noticed that I use all of them, so what do you think about that? Does that help me to think about that? Will it help you, do you think, as a writer to think about how you use commas for your reader? Tell me about that.
Like, if you use commas, your reader is interested.
So you might be helping the reader have interest and understand what you're writing about. Other thoughts, Miguel?
You notice that you only put commas where they need to go?
I only put them where they need to go, right? I don't just stick commas in like, oh, I gotta use commas, right? They really need to be there, okay? Anything else that you noticed? Okay, so would it be beneficial for you to do some comma research and think about, you know, how am I using commas? Am I using those to help my reader? Ruben, you think that would be beneficial for you as a reader, or writer, I'm sorry? Yeah? Okay, so here's what I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna bring you a half sheet of paper, just like I used, and I'd like you to try some of your own comma research, all right? But the important piece is, when you do your comma research, the really important piece is this part. When you go to the back and think, okay, what do I learn about myself as a writer? Okay? In the earlier class, I heard someone say, wow, I don't ever join 2 sentences together. So we talked about, well, would there be times in their writing where they wanted to really show things went together and they thought, yeah, that might be a possibility, something they would want to do in their writing occasionally, to show the reader if these things go together, okay? Another girl said, oh my gosh, I don't use any commas at all to help my reader. This is something I might want to do. So this is really about, what do I learn about myself as a writer that I can use and think about now, okay? So I'm going to make a little arrow on here to go to the back and write about your learning. Any questions about how you might go about your comma research? Okay. I'm going to give you a half sheet. Jose, do your comma research, write your learning on the back, and if you would pop it in my turn-in bucket, and then you could move on to working on your writing piece. Sound good?
Yes.
Sense? Okay, let's get started.
Could I play